The night was colder than usual for December, the kind of cold that seemed to sneak past even the thickest coat and settle into the bones. Daniel walked briskly down the quiet street, his breath fogging in the frosty air. It was Christmas Eve, yet unlike many others around him who hurried home to their families, he had just finished a long, dragging shift at the hardware store. The streets of the nicer part of town were lit with glowing decorations, wreaths on doors, shimmering lights around windows, laughter spilling from inside warm homes. But the closer he drew to his neighborhood, the dimmer the streets became, the warmth of Christmas fading into the darker parts of the city where festive cheer was little more than a reminder of what people didn't have. Daniel thought about his son, Ethan, waiting at home in their small apartment. He was only 7, still young enough to believe that Christmas held magic, even if their tree was secondhand and the presents under it were few. Daniel had done his best, bought a toy car and a storybook with the little money he could spare, wrapped them carefully to make the morning feel special. He always tried, though the weight of raising a child alone pressed down on him like an invisible burden. 2 years had passed since his wife, Claire, had died unexpectedly, leaving him to juggle work, bills, and fatherhood. He was proud of how far they had come, but nights like this, when exhaustion clawed at him and loneliness bit sharper than the cold, were the hardest. Taking the familiar shortcut through a narrow alley, Daniel adjusted his scarf, eager to shave a few minutes off his walk. That was when he noticed something unusual. Near a row of battered trash bins, a small figure crouched low, almost hidden in shadow. At first, he thought it might be a stray animal. He slowed his steps, his eyes narrowing as he tried to see. Then he heard it, a sound so faint it almost disappeared into the wind. A sniffle, a child's sniffle. Daniel's heart lurched. He stepped closer, and in the pale light of the flickering street lamp, he saw her clearly. A little girl, no more than 6 or 7, her hair tangled and her cheeks red from the biting cold. Her coat was thin, the buttons mismatched, and her shoes looked far too small for her feet. She was kneeling by the bins, digging through plastic bags with trembling fingers. When she pulled out half of a discarded sandwich, her face lit up with relief as if she had found treasure. Daniel stopped, frozen in place. The sight hit him like a punch to the chest. He had seen hardship before, had known struggle himself, but seeing a child, this small, this vulnerable, searching through trash on Christmas Eve felt unbearable. "Hey," he called gently, his voice low, careful not to startle her. The girl spun around, her wide brown eyes filled with fear. She clutched the sandwich to her chest as though he might snatch it from her. I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice shaking. "I'll go. Please don't tell anyone." Daniel slowly crouched down, trying to meet her gaze on her level. His voice softened further, warm and steady. No, sweetheart. You don't have to be sorry. Are you hungry?" Her lips quivered, and she gave the tiniest nod. She didn't speak, but the way her fingers clung to that dirty sandwich told him everything he needed to know. Carefully, Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the thermos of hot chocolate he had been saving for Ethan. He hesitated for only a moment, guilt tugging at him. His son had been looking forward to it all day, but then he unscrewed the cap and held it out to her. "Here, it's warm." The little girl stared at it as if it were a miracle. Slowly, cautiously, she took the cup with shaking hands and lifted it to her lips. The moment the warmth touched her mouth, tears spilled down her cheeks. She sipped again, faster this time, as though she were afraid it might be taken away. Daniel felt his chest tighten, his throat ache. He forced a gentle smile. "What's your name?" She lowered the cup just enough to whisper, "Lila." "That's a beautiful name," Daniel said softly. "I'm Daniel. Where's your family, Lila?" Her eyes fell to the ground, her voice breaking as she answered. "I don't have one, not anymore." The words were so simple, but the weight they carried crushed Daniel's heart. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He thought of Ethan asleep at home, safe and warm, waiting for him. He thought of Claire, how fiercely she had loved their boy, how she would have cried at the sight of this lost little girl. He thought of all the times he had feared not being enough for his son, and here was another child, utterly alone in the world, with no one to hold her, no one to keep her safe. Daniel swallowed hard, fighting the lump in his throat. The wind cut through the alley, and he noticed how Lila shivered, her thin coat no match for the cold night. In that instant, something shifted inside him. He couldn't just leave her here, couldn't pretend he hadn't seen. She was a child, someone's child, and now, in this moment, she was his responsibility. He extended his hand slowly, his voice calm and reassuring. "Come on, Lila, it's too cold out here. I've got a little boy at home, he's about your age. We've got food, and a tree, and a warm place to stay. You don't have to be alone tonight." Her eyes searched his face, full of suspicion and hesitation. She had clearly learned not to trust easily. For a long moment, she didn't move, the silence stretching between them, broken only by the whistle of the wind. Daniel kept his hand out, patient, steady, silently promising with his eyes that he meant her no harm. Finally, with a trembling breath, Lila shifted closer. Her tiny fingers, cold and fragile, slipped into his larger, calloused hand. She held on tightly, as though afraid he might disappear. Daniel felt something inside him break wide open. He closed his hand around hers, gently but firmly, and whispered, "You're safe now." Together, they stepped out of the shadows of the alley and into the night, leaving behind the trash bins, the hunger, and the loneliness. For Lila, it was the first step into something she hadn't dared to hope for. For Daniel, it was the moment he realized Christmas was about far more than gifts and lights. It was about finding those who had been lost, and giving them a reason to believe again. Daniel's small apartment sat on the top floor of an old brick building, its hallway dimly lit and faintly smelling of paint and dust. It wasn't much, but inside it was theirs. As he unlocked the door and guided Lila in, warmth rushed to greet them, carrying the faint smell of soup simmering on the stove. Ethan, who had been waiting by the window for his father, rushed forward the moment the door creaked open. His face brightened instantly, then froze in curiosity when he saw the little girl holding Daniel's hand. "Dad, who's this?" Ethan asked, his wide blue eyes darting between his father and the stranger. Daniel glanced at Lila, who stood timidly in the doorway, clutching the thermos to her chest. "This is Lila," he said gently. "She's our guest tonight. It's cold out, and she needed a place to stay." Ethan tilted his head, his young mind processing the idea. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, his face broke into a big smile. "Hi, Lila, do you want to help me put the star on the tree?" For the first time since Daniel had met her, Lila's expression shifted. A flicker of light touched her eyes, hesitant but real. She glanced up at Daniel, who nodded reassuringly, and then back at Ethan. Slowly, she stepped further inside. Their Christmas tree was small and uneven, its branches a little bare, but to Daniel and Ethan it meant the world. It was covered in paper ornaments Ethan had made at school, and a few old baubles Daniel had saved from when he was a boy. The star, however, still sat in its box on the coffee table, waiting. "Here," Ethan said, picking up the shiny gold ornament. "You can do it." He dragged over a chair and motioned for her to climb up. Daniel watched closely, his heart tightening as Lila's thin hands reached up and placed the star carefully on the highest branch. When she stepped down, she turned to look at the glowing tree, her lips curving upward into the smallest smile. It wasn't much, but it was the kind of smile Daniel knew could only come from a child who, for the first time in a long time, felt like she belonged somewhere. "Perfect," Ethan said proudly, clapping his hands. Daniel swallowed hard, blinking away the sting in his eyes. For a moment, the little apartment seemed brighter, not because of the lights strung on the tree, but because of the warmth that filled the room. "Come on," Daniel said gently, leading them to the kitchen table. He poured 3 bowls of hot soup, sliding one carefully in front of Lila. At first, she stared at it suspiciously, as though unsure if she was truly allowed to eat. But when Daniel gave her an encouraging nod, she picked up the spoon and took a bite. Within seconds, she was eating faster, her small frame trembling with relief. "Slow down," Daniel urged softly, though there was no judgment in his voice. "There's plenty." Ethan watched her with wide eyes. "Don't worry," he said proudly. "Dad makes the best soup. You can have as much as you want." Daniel smiled faintly at his son. He had no idea how extraordinary his kindness was, it came so naturally to him, as though compassion were woven into his very being. Claire would have been proud of him, Daniel thought, proud of how their boy had grown even through the hardships. After dinner, the 3 of them settled in the living room. Ethan showed Lila his favorite toy cars, carefully lining them up on the rug. To Daniel's surprise, Lila joined in, her small fingers pushing a car along the floor, a quiet giggle escaping her lips. The sound struck him like a bell in his chest, clear, fragile, but so beautiful that it filled the room with a kind of joy he hadn't felt in years. Later, when Ethan grew tired and Daniel tucked him into bed, Lila lingered by the doorway, uncertainty shadowing her face. Daniel crouched down to meet her eyes. You can stay in the spare room tonight, he told her gently. It's not fancy, but it's warm. And you're safe here. Her lips trembled, and for a moment she looked as though she might cry again. Why are you helping me? She whispered. Daniel hesitated, his throat tight. He thought of his son, of how much he would give to protect him. He thought of how easily life could have turned differently, how Ethan could have been the one wandering lost and hungry. Because no child should ever be alone on Christmas, he said softly. And because, I think you were meant to find us tonight. That night, after Lila finally fell asleep in the spare bed, Daniel sat quietly at the kitchen table, staring at the twinkling lights of the tree. His chest ached, not just from sorrow for the hardships she had endured, but from something deeper, an awakening sense of responsibility. She wasn't his child, not yet, but the way she had clung to his hand in that alley, the way she had smiled at the tree, it felt as though she had been placed in his path for a reason. The days that followed were not easy. Daniel contacted social services, determined to learn what he could about Lila's situation. There were questions, forms, and long conversations with caseworkers. He learned her story in pieces. Her mother had passed away the previous winter, her father had disappeared months later, leaving her to drift between shelters until she stopped going altogether. The more he learned, the more Daniel's resolve grew. He couldn't let her slip through the cracks of the system. Not now. It took months of persistence, of juggling work and meetings, of convincing officials that he could provide for another child despite his modest means. But through every obstacle, Daniel thought of that Christmas Eve, of finding her in the alley and watching her place the star on the tree. That memory fueled him through every setback. By spring, the paperwork was complete. The day the adoption was finalized, Daniel held Ethan in one arm and Lila in the other. She was no longer the frightened girl scavenging for food in the dark. She was his daughter now, Ethan's sister, and a permanent part of the family. That night, as the three of them sat around the dinner table, Ethan chattered happily about school, and Lila laughed, really laughed, for the first time since he had met her. Daniel sat back, his eyes misty, his heart full. For years, Christmas had been a reminder of what he had lost. But now, as he looked at the two children across from him, he realized it had given him something he hadn't even known he was missing. Family. And this time, he wasn't going to let it go.